Oh boy, here we are. I'm very excited to have this guest who needs no introduction, but he's going to get one anyway. I'm going to pull up your Substack right here just so. Here we go. I'm talking to Morgoth. Who doesn't know Morgoth? Morgoth and I go way back. Morgoth is one of the original friends of the show. Now, I'm going to start with that. I'm going to start saying that Morgoth did me a kindness, the show a kindness, quite some time ago. He was one of the first guys of consequence that shouted out Blood's Atellite. And a great many of our listeners came to us from that endorsement. So, as I say, Morgoth is good with the house forever. Morgoth could come up to me and he could carve his name in my forehead, and I'd say, "Great point. May I have another?" Even I got a comment here. That's lovely. Let me just pull this up from the chat. He says, "Told my wife to watch. Told my wife to watch The Kid because Dimes is interviewing Morgoth, and she said it sounds very important."
Imagine trying to explain that to somebody in the real world.
I say that to my, said to my wife. She's like, "Oh, is he? He's Morgoth. He sounds like an important guy, but he is. Shut the fuck up. He is. You don't know." Morgoth isn't on Selling Sunset, so she doesn't know a lot about that right now, because that's all she's into. People are asking, Alicia, is Judas in the house for this one? My co-host, he is not. He is driving to some godforsaken warehouse in Canada. I always invite him to these, but he can't make it. He's got this fucking job. I cannot crowbar him away from his responsibilities. Oh, here we go. All hail Morgoth. There's a lot of great fans of Morgoth out there. So
yeah,
thank you.
I'm grateful to them all as well. I always try to sort of give back to the team and all of that. So it is nice, and I always recognize them as well. Even if you're just a little account on Twitter with like 50 followers, I always know the regulars and all of that.
Yeah, and you've done a great many favors for people over the years. You're a rare breed of person, and I'm having a Devon Stack on in the coming weeks, and you're always two that I think of where I think, who doesn't like these people? Because in this space, myself included, I got a big fucking mouth. I'm always talking mad shit, and so you make enemies very easy in this space. But even when you've had disagreements with people, because we're men, we're all allowed to disagree, it's never fermented into a beef or a feud, it seems, which is increasingly rare, especially these days. It sounds like I'm building him up. It sounds like I'm inflating his head, and I am. I got my Japanese fan out. I'm fanning my face. I'm getting the vapors just talking to him. But we were we were discussing something just before we went live, and I'd love to jump into it. And I believe you were mentioning Keir Starmer. Did you want to? We're talking, I believe, about these NGOs, and over across the pond where you are, it would be Hope Not Hate. Over where I'm at, it would be the Canada Anti-Hate Network. And in the U.S., it's like the SPL. There's a few in the U.S. There's SPLC among others, but we were talking about their relationship with the political apparatus and the government. If you'd like to kind of go into that.
Well, what I was sort of leading to was that there was a thing that happened with Hope Not Hate where they went and infiltrated something that was going on the continent, and people, the sort of the people on the right in Britain, they then figured out that Hope Not Hate must have had a fake passport, which is illegal. You're not allowed to do that, and so what that meant was that they could go. That led directly to the government. And what I thought was funny was that nobody seemed to care. The government didn't seem to care. And people put in freedom of information requests to find out what was going on with this, and it was all just ignored. And it gets into this. I think what we've got in this country, where the political formula doesn't really work anymore, and everybody can see through it. But then they just double down on that and push forward with it anyway, regardless. And this is especially the case with Keir Starmer, who just doesn't seem to care about alienating anybody at all, even his own base. It's truly mind blowing where you've got this kind of it's screw your optics. I'm going in, but it's like the Labour Party or the Prime Minister. Um, like it just doesn't matter. One of the sort of analogies that I've been drawing is as on one of my favorite films, Heat, when they kind of weigh up whether they should be going in to the bank, the famous bank heist, where should we sneak around in the middle of the night and cut through the alarm systems. And it's like, well, we can't do that this time. We're gonna have to go in hard. We're just gonna have to kick the door open and shove shotguns in people's faces and break noses. And it's going to be a big mess and it's going to be ugly, but that's the only way we can get the job done. And that's what this Labour government's like. They just don't care. They've been given a task. What that is, we can get into, and they're just going to go in hard on us, and that's exactly
Yeah,
what
I
they're doing.
view Keir Starmer from a distance, and I've seen a variety of different takes on what he's, whether or not he's secretly one of us, whether or not people should trust the plan. It seems to be pretty incoherent what he's doing. It just kind of like Emmanuel Macron. You hear the arguments that he's secretly a Hyperborean nationalist or something like that. Like he's actually the last Frenchman, right? But even with Keir Starmer, I hear people saying, well, maybe he's up to something. I've never seen trusting the plan actually work out. But in your view, Keir Starmer, is he just a graduation of what's been going on with labor politics, or is he distinctly bad?
I think he's distinctly bad because I think he's there to perform a task, and that task is some sort of technocratic agenda, probably digital IDs, um, and just a general surveillance state. You see, there's all these different policies and these different sort of parts of the surveillance state that they're bringing in, and they don't really they're kind of disconnected. And what they're missing is the central node. And this is why I was talking about we have to go in strong. So you can flesh out and you can sort of dig around on what exactly, the grand picture. And you've got the bank aspect to it where you tap your cards, you've got cameras everywhere, and all of this builds a picture and a framework towards like a digital surveillance grid. But it's missing that last bit. It's missing the sort of the final key that slots in and kind of operates it all. And the problem for the British regime is that they can't do that with nudging. You've got these nudge units, as they call them, the way to manipulate the masses. There's all kinds of departments of government which manipulate the British public to think in certain ways, and a lot of the times you don't really understand what's going on. A lot of the times you'll just get this uncanny valley feeling that something's a little bit off, but you can't prove it unless, or maybe like a year or 18 months later, it'll come out like, yeah, it was some kind of controlled spontaneity is what they call it. I mean, even that term, controlled spontaneity, is it just blows your mind. And all of this sort of nudging and reframing, and in the end of the day, you have a digital ID or you don't. And I think what Starmer is there for is to do that final sort of put in that final piece of the jigsaw puzzle, whether or not we want it. It was just announced out of the blue, and I think he's on another aspect to it is I think he doesn't have long. He's got like a sort of a window of time, and then it'll be too late. So he's basically he's on a deadline, and he acts like he's working towards a deadline as well. That sounds sort of a bit maybe he's a conspiratorial, but I do. That's my
Yeah,
general
we are
take on
friends to
Starmer.
conspiracy theories here. I think they actually have, even though their excesses can seem kind of kooky, they tend to have more or less a pretty good batting average. I know you live across the pond. Batting average refers to the game of baseball. I don't think you have that over there. But and I don't watch baseball, so I don't really know what it means. But I'm pretty sure it's the amount of balls that you can hit. But the digital ID thing, that would have been condemned as conspiratorial maybe 10 to 15 years ago. An interesting, you talk about nudge units. We actually covered the book Nudge quite some time ago, went into great detail about what nudge units are. One, and you could say this is a strategy. I tend to think it does. It's that if you get the public talking about something long enough and they're negative towards it, they'll eventually just get sick of it. So we've been talking about digital IDs, complaining about its inevitability for like a decade, it seems, to the point where even the people that don't like it just want to stop talking about it. You kind of saw this with UFO disclosure. I don't know where you land on that, but the American government just started admitting UFOs, and people have been talking about it for so long, no one cares anymore. It's you get an alien could show up tomorrow, an extraterrestrial, and I bet most people wouldn't care. They've just been so inundated with the discourse that they become numb to it. So I tend to think even those there's the rare people like us who are still seething mad about it and trying to ring the alarm bells, but the average person, I do, just like with CCTV. I'm old enough to remember when CCTV was a thing that was being rolled out, and everyone complained about it for a bit, but then they just started putting up with it. It seems that any sort of surveillance apparatus, that's the first thing that they don't even try and sell you on it narratively. They just do it, and then people kind of get used to it. And I don't know what to do about that, frankly. Like, and to me, saying it's a conspiracy, it is true, but conspiracies do happen. But at this point, I don't know what to do about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I remember on the mobile phones when people used to say, "I think the mobile phone might be listening to what I'm saying," and now you just kind of now you can just it's just a fact, and we all know that it does, and it's listening all of the time, and it's just become normalized. It's just become this. I mean, I'm kind of strange because when I was paranoid about this stuff like 5 years ago, especially during COVID, and it didn't actually happen. And I was kind of sort of like, well, maybe I did get a bit carried away. Maybe I did, and I did all of this kind of content about how there was going to be like this gamified society, and that there's an inherent logic to the digital, which is now going to map itself onto the real world, and everything, and there's something within the digital technology which always creates a gamified system. And so I was like sort of exploring what that would be like in the real world and everything. And I had all this content on it, and it never actually happened. And it just didn't
I
come
did
to
the same
fruition.
thing. I feel you.
And then there was like this, what was it, this summer, I think it was, when just out of the blue they announced that we were going to have digital IDs and it was going to be mandatory. And then that's that. And everybody was sort of digging through all of these old videos, edits that I had on where I was. And I was like, I don't know what to say anymore. I've said it. So I put together a sort of compendium of me paranoid technocracy stuff, and posted it on Substack all together for everybody. And obviously, we're going to see how it goes. I've been surprised at the amount of pushback that there's been. I think it's entered a sphere where it's there's certain aspects of things which people are a bit jittery about talking about. I mean, I just posted a video today about the discourse with Fuentes and Tucker Carlson and this kind of podcast network and Israel and all of this. And there's people who, I mean, obviously the whole point of that is that people are getting less shy about talking about that in particular. And I get into why on that video actually. But there's other things which are more low-hanging fruit. And I think that like WEF and Klaus Schwab became like a kind of Facebook meme for boomers, and it wasn't edgy. And this was part of the problem with the discourse at the time, was that people are thinking, well, look, you're not going to get banned from talking about Klaus Schwab or the World Economic Forum or digital IDs, and it's a kind of off ramp from radicalism. I mean, that wasn't actually true. There was a ton of people getting banned for the COVID stuff and all of that. But I do take the point. I do get what they mean. You're not actually pushing at an envelope that much, but it is actually true. And so you get into this problem where you've got to do a kind of backtrack, and you got to think, actually, some of those cringe sort of takes and that you saw going around, that they actually were correct after all. And I think it does seem like they're going to kind of give up on the climate change craziness to a degree. But one of the things that you have to remember, we go back to the WEF stuff, which people don't talk about, is that the deadline was always 2030. It was always, if you're going to go along with this narrative, this conspiracy, if you like, they had set themselves a deadline, and it was 2030, Agenda 2030, and all of that. And I think it got derailed for various reasons, but there's elements of it all they're still going to push through with. One of the problems they've got with the climate change stuff is that these AI data centers just require an absolute colossal amount of energy to power them along. And so at some point, they've been like, you're going to have to make it, you're going to have to decide whether you want to have the digital gulag or the green agenda. You can't have both. One cancels the other out. And they've decided, well, we'll go for the digital gulag then. We'll go for Tron.
They really do seem to be moving away. I'm curious to see if they'll actually embrace nuclear, because that used to be the biggest opponent to nuclear energy seemed to be these environmentalists, and they were allowed to control that narrative. But it would seem to me that nuclear energy and oil, of course, but that would be the most effective way to fuel these grandiose dreams. And so maybe you'll just see that like shuffled off the stage. People just stop giving a shit about nuclear energy, even though it takes like, I don't know, 9,000 years to build one. But you know what I mean? But no, I agree completely. I'm just looking at some of the comments here. WEF is to liberal technocrats what Comic-Con is to furries, with some great skiing. I want to point out that you do have your arms around the central problem here, which is that we can always get caught up in making predictions. For the record, most people I've seen on our side of the political spectrum have not made a single correct prediction fucking ever. It doesn't matter if it's economically, it doesn't matter if it's about war. It's just we're not very good at it. But so handing out dates and precise agendas gets us into trouble. But really, it's undeniable that you are pointing to a group of highly influential, highly resourced people who are very open about what they want to do. And I give the example of Palantir in the US. Okay, what is Palantir? Palantir wants to be something of a parallel CIA, and that intersects with every concern you just said, with data security, with I don't know what Peter Thiel's up to. He seems to love naming his companies after the villains in Lord of the Rings. I don't know what that's about. But here's what we know about Palantir. First of all, it's run by a gay Jewish transhumanist. Okay, and that's what gets a lot of people fired up because they hate that guy. What I would say is if it wasn't run by a Jewish guy, a gay guy, or a transhumanist, it would still be bad. Now, that conglomeration of identities has a wide appeal in our space, but if there was just a white Protestant guy running it, you can make the argument that it would be just as bad, an increased surveillance state, or even if it was just a white transhumanist guy. Like, this whole thing is tied up in nefarious agendas, and that's a very hard thing to sell many of these audiences on. And like you had said, it's more controversial than you might think. And I think you're like many in our space, you're able to hold multiple ideas in your head at the same time. A lot of people can hold one. There's one agenda, there's one topic, whereas you can say, okay, this is bad, but here's 7 other things that are causing modernity or causing the modern malaise. And that really jumbles a lot of people's wires from what I've seen. Because they'll try, like, you can watch them in real time, try to redirect it back to your thing. Like in Canada, I'll give you an example. A lot of people in this country, they'll point to, Indian migration or the NGOs that are driving migration, which might receive funding from Alex Soros, connected to Israel, connected to various groups. Okay, yeah, it is. Yes. Problem. However, there is a fentanyl problem in North America, not just Canada, North America. It is being funneled in through China, produced in Chinese factories, through the Hong Kong triads. And I believe China is directly responsible for something like 90% of the fentanyl within North America, which is the most, it might as well be biochemical warfare. Every organized crime syndicate does their own thing. China's got fentanyl. And I'm just going to say, Jews have nothing to do with that. And people get mad at me when I say that. I'm like, they just don't. That is just a thing, and that is poisoning us. That is ruining lives. That is I do interpret it as something like chemical warfare. So I'm like, I've encountered that's very difficult for people to see these two opponents. It needs to be one at the top of the pyramid. You know what I mean? Otherwise, they won't take it seriously. And I don't know what to do about that either. That's a communication issue. But yeah, you're just going to get a lot of heat from these people.
Well, there seems to be more crossover when you bring Palantir in, because back in the kind of the WEF sort of COVID wars on the right that we had about 5 years ago, it was seen that if you were talking about Klaus Schwab or the WEF or Bill Gates, it was less edgy and it was a distraction from talking about, you know, that group in the Middle East, particularly Zionist power and stuff. And what we find now is, I've noticed a couple of the people who pushed back the hardest against me are now like panicking, because it turns out like you've got Larry Ellison involved, these kind of billionaire Zionists, in the actual construction. You've got Palantir involved with killing Palestinians, like marking them up, and they've got these horrible names for, like, they call it lavender or something, and that's how they're gonna find out who Hamas were. But what they'll do is just run it through kind of AI aggregator and take out a whole building because there's one Hamas foot soldier in there or something. But the point is that you find that actually it wasn't an either or that much, and all of a sudden, one of the things, you know, I don't want to sort of rehash old arguments and stuff, but I was accused of being a libertarian, and people were saying like you've got, and one of the things that I found like interesting is that everybody's sort of a libertarian when your enemies are in charge. And so all of a sudden, I've noticed a few people who were calling me a libertarian back then are now like sort of shitting their pants because their enemies are going to be in charge of the surveillance grid. Their enemies are going to be programming the digital, like the people they fear the most. And as you were saying, it's inherently bad no matter who controls it. And that was kind of what I was trying to get across at the time, was like, I don't really care who is running this, who is in charge of implementing it. It's still bad. It's still just a bad thing to have. And to bring it back to sort of Keir Starmer and Britain and whatnot, they used as the excuse they used to bring this in was the what they call the migrant crisis of all these illegal immigrants just swanning in on boats. And they said that we're going to bring in digital ID in because we'll be able to find out who's legal and who isn't in the country. So if you're not, if you don't have your paperwork, if you don't have a digital ID, basically it means you're a legal citizen. And this is sort of an appeal to the right. So it's the idea. It hasn't worked, but the pitch was that we can piggyback this in because the libtards will probably just go along with it anyway. But if we pitch it to the right, as if to say we're going to use it to prevent illegal immigration, maybe they'll go along with it. That actually hasn't happened. And of course, Starmer just doesn't care. He'll just plow through.
And this is line for line what Palantir said about its version of digital ID that was trying to roll out in America, saying that it'll help us track illegal migrants much faster. Just put that to the side and realize that they could do it now if they wanted to. And they're kind of doing that now in the U.S. right now to the best of their abilities. But it requires you to believe that the government hasn't already been surveilling you and couldn't do that if it wanted to. And like you said, it's not working on our people, but it would work on liberals who get into debates with us and say, "Look, just shut up. They're doing what you want. It's anti-migration." And yeah, it's just a narrative deployed to silence us. It doesn't work on us, but it works with our opponents. And again, like I don't know, aside, you see these protests where they go and smash up CCTV cameras and engage in direct action. I think that's the only thing, because there's so many. It's almost Kurzweilian, and I'm referring to Ray Kurzweil. I believe he had set, and this sort of connects to what we were talking about earlier. He set the date of the technological singularity at 2045. I thought it used to be like 2030, and then I think he had to bump it up and hope nobody noticed. But that's supposed to be the date where all technology converges, where, to put it shortly, technology can solve technology's problems. There will be some AGI, there will be some Skynet that can fix all our problems and put us into a post-materialist world. And whether or not you believe that's realistic, because some people say, of course, that's not going to happen. I agree, but there are people who believe that, and these people have a lot of money, and these people have a lot of influence and connection. So when I'm discussing this with these people, I'm like, I don't even care if the conspiracy is fucking true. Do you think there's important people that believe it's true, and do you think they're agitating for that agenda on the inside? Because Peter Thiel seems to believe some pretty wild shit. And if you're an elite theorist, like some of your listeners might be, they think, oh, these elites, they don't believe in anything. They're almost even apolitical. They just believe in power for power's sake. And then I know Academic Agent is all about that, but I tend to believe they are possessed by certain ideologies and beliefs and an idea of the world. So it's not even that whether or not you think AGI is possible. It's like whether or not, how many billions of dollars are going to be funneled into forcing it through, and what are the consequences of that being forced through? Because like you had said, that you can witness.
I keep seeing, I get suggested like videos and things which I haven't watched. It's how you put things on the back burner and you're like, I'll come back to that when I get the time. And it's this idea of like Peter Thiel, and it's like stuff to do with the Antichrist, or he is the Antichrist, or like what is that? What's that
Okay,
about? I,
this
I,
is funny.
I haven't looked into that. I don't
I'll give you,
understand
it's
this.
funny. So he's into spirituality. He's sort of a Silicon Valley, I believe, a former atheist who got into Christianity in a similar way that Jordan Peterson got into Christianity. They approached it from a scientific direction. So when you hear Jordan Peterson talk about Christianity, it's through a psychoanalytic lens and his general interest in world mythology. So it's not really from the center of it. So you see a lot of these Silicon Valley types, they're viewing Christianity like a type of software that you can run on society. I believe Elon Musk views it the same way. So they're it's a very utilitarian sort of thing. So he talks a lot about the Antichrist. He talks in these sorts of terms. And there was an interview he did where he was looking absolutely fucking ghastly. He looked utterly ghoulish, because as far as I can tell, he did the classic gay man thing where he was already in shape and then also decided to go on Ozempic. So he was just fucking hollow eye. He looked like a ghoul from fucking Fallout. But he was explaining his, I'm paraphrasing here, but he was explaining his goal for humanity, what he's trying to accomplish with his companies, and to fight the Antichrist. And the interviewer had said something to the effect of, hey, based on what you just said, it almost sounds like you're the Antichrist. And he paused and had this very comical look on his face. And so everyone made a joke of it. And then he decided to do the most normal thing possible. He did a real hyper regular thing and decided to host a series of lectures on the Antichrist, which is definitely not something the Antichrist would do. He wouldn't host a series of lectures saying, here's why I'm not the Antichrist. So it's just this fucking, it's hilarious to everybody as far as I can tell. And I believe the lectures have to be paid for. I desperately want access to these lectures. I hope they're entertaining. I hope I don't leave interested, but it's just a strange thing for a guy who's running a multi-billion-dollar company to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not good news, is it? When you've got like literal megalomaniac Bond villains having delusions of their own grandeur, and they're well in the advanced stages of actually just bringing all of this stuff onto us. I mean, like I said, I was freaked out because I first noticed it. I first noticed it when I was on the phone and I bought a jet wash and I was trying. I was missing a part of it and I was shouting at people down the phone, asking why doesn't this work? What do I need? Where do I get it? And then, like all of a sudden, just on the internet, on all the devices, I was getting advertisements for this little kind of plastic washer thing, which would connect the hose to the machine. That freaked me out. Like that was I'm so old and such a luddite. Like I found that really creepy. But then when you begin like, oh, it's actually the Antichrist who's suggesting this, so I'm just like, look, I'm not on board with this. I think it's bollocks. I'm not impressed with this kind of language because I'm a sort of cynical Gen Xer. I suppose so are the. This is the thing. Like so are the people who are. So is Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, I suppose. But I immediately feel cringe at this, to use the
Yeah,
modern word. I immediately feel like you're talking shit and you're an
y-
arsehole. I'm not impressed with this pseudo intellectual gobbledygook. I'm scared because I think you're a nut job and you're messing around with things that you don't
yeah,
understand. But I'm not standing here in awe of this kind of grand vision of how AI is going to be like some kind of archangel demiurge or something like that. Like, just
yeah,
get this
yeah.
shit out of my
It's
face, please.
unnecessary, and every time I've seen it, it's an extra layer of complexity that doesn't need to be there. It tends to spook people off. Like you can look at, because I work in marketing. Let me just say that. So over my career, I remember when they first started introducing, and this is to the point you just made, listening devices. And I think the first big controversy was Xbox. It was reported that their microphone and speaker never turned off, so it was always recording you. And I think that was the last time people cared about that, because now it's a given that all your devices listen to you all the time, and no one really cares. You know what I mean? So the rate of acceptance with that sort of technological advancement, that is what is so disheartening. But then, like, you should care about that. And then when people come out and say, here's another thing about that. Now, did you know? They get into numerology, of course. And if you add up the serial number on that, it equals 666. And 666 is the mark of the beast. Like, they go off into very QAnon stuff, and you get lost in all this sort of pseudo religiosity. And I say that's fun. You can have fun with that. Who does that? Was what BitChute made all its money on, having those types of documentaries. Everyone remember going on BitChute? Anyone remember going on Amazon Prime back in the day? You could learn how the pyramids were the fucking Antichrist, and UFOs are evidence that the Holocaust didn't happen. All kinds of wild stuff, but it can be interesting for me, but it doesn't actually matter. It's just this extra stuff. It's just entertainment for internet poison people like us. But I don't have patience for it anymore. And that's to your point that anytime someone's trying to say, do you know what this reminds me of? Saint Michael, like, shut the fuck up. Get the fuck out of
Yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah. It's just bullshit. And I don't like it. I don't like these people. I like what I'm trying to think of some kind of quote. I don't like you. I don't like your dog, and I don't like the horse you rode in on. No, fuck off. It's really just this kind of old fashioned grug cynicism to it all as well. I hate the pretentious language, and it just grates on it because it's like at the end of the day, what they're really bothered with is like the bottom line. It's like one of the things what we actually see because of this is just endless sort of slop videos and like marketing scams and targeting people. And I just think, is this it? You know, Elon Musk on Twitter. he posts like Grok's latest sort of AI. I saw one earlier today actually, and it was a picture, and it had these like kind of sexy babes, and they were kind of jumping into the air. It was all fantasy, and then they were transforming into like panthers and wolves and things. And Elon Musk, and his kind of, he was shilling this, and he was saying this is going to be so amazing. Imagine when this was like into a video game. And it gets to the heart of like what I think's gone wrong here, because when we still don't have good movies or a new sort of art form from this technology. And the technology exists. You know, the technology is we have it now. Why is it all? And I'm talking purely in terms of sort of entertainment, in terms of sort of people producing and creating great films using this technology. And I don't see it happening. And yet the technology actually does exist. And Musk is always kind of like, oh, we're nearly there. We're nearly there. This is going to be so amazing. And I'm like, it's already good enough. I was playing like Final Fantasy VII in like 1997, and I played it for like 150 hours, and I was amazed by it. I loved it. I played it forever and ever and ever. I don't want to do all the side quests. I loved the story.
That's
I
what
loved the
made me buy a
characters.
PS1 when I was younger. They used to run ads for Final
Yeah.
Fantasy VII, and it was like nothing I'd seen before. So there's still some magic there, yeah.
And if you look at that now, like the characters that you're watching are just like three triangles stuck together. It really is so bad. Or the big black one, Barrett. He's like a few squares.
His
stuck
gun
together.
arm was like literally
But
Lego.
yeah, it's just like these. It's like these Lego figures, and so the issue what I'm getting at here is that the creativity is going into producing the technology and not into something sort of more substantial and spiritual. There's not actually this new wave of amazing films or well, I don't play video game. I haven't played video games for years, so I don't know what the situation is there. But it's this assumption that you can kind of replicate a kind of spiritual or poetic vision if the technology gets good enough, and they can't do that. It's not happening. It should have happened already by now, and I've got no doubt that in a few months' time it'll be even more spectacular, but it'll be just as hollow. And it's as if they're desperately trying to kind of replicate something which is metaphysical, and they don't understand it despite all of their highfalutin jargon about the Antichrist. It's all just nonsense, because if it wasn't, then they would actually be creating something almost religious with the technology, and it's not. It's just spy technology. People, we talk about like disenchanting the world, and what I'm kind of getting at here is like they speak in the language of almost like re-enchanting the world through artificial intelligence and this. And just to keep it, I'm not even talking about robots taking over the world, just in terms of like these images and these pictures and creating these worlds that they could be creating. And it's not happening. It's not even beginning to happen. In fact, it's just getting more and more alienating. I mean, you can go back and you can look at even basic things. What was it? There's a book that I've got, The Once and Future King, T.H. White, on the shelf over there. And it's got this, the artwork to it is just this kind of whimsical watercolor sort of thing of the witches and King Arthur and Mordred and all of this. And you see, even just in that there's a kind of, that it signifies something. Whereas if you've got like the most highly pixelated woman turning into a panther in this, it's like a highly advanced Final Fantasy cutscene used to be, but without the story and without the human connection. And this is why I've kind of just think they talk a load of shit. I do. They like to use this kind of language. They like to lean into it, but they just don't. They just fundamentally don't
Yeah,
get it
they
at
have
all.
a very materialist way of looking at the problem, which is that if we give more advanced tools to people, then they can replicate what is in their minds easily. Because there's no, I have access to Sora right now, and Sora 2, which is AI. It can generate these sort of AI slop, but very, very good. It's highly advanced, but no one's go through the explore function, and it's I'm not joking, it's just people making images and videos of burgers, like fantasy like multicolored. What if a burger bun was purple? That's what people are making it with. Now there's this article I wrote quite some time ago on Vanguard's journal, and I was taking a pretty controversial approach, and I was trying to defend postmodern art, all the art that people complains about. You go to an art gallery and you see just a splash of paint on a canvas. Everyone says my kid could do that, but I forget what the article itself was called, but the point was that the purpose of art, while trying to represent beauty, was also representing something distinctly human. And those could be one of the same, especially with sculpture. But something very interesting happened with the advent of the photograph. That sent shockwaves throughout the art world because now you can perfectly capture a beautiful image, a forest, a lake, whatever it might be. So, what you found there was visual artists, painters, trying to figure out, okay, the thing we're trying to capture has basically been captured by technology in an inhuman way, but we don't want to compete with that. We need to run the other direction and figure out how to capture humanity in a way that a machine cannot replicate. And it seems that we're running out of those options because it becomes much, much easier for people to default to AI slap. But to me, that was always the purpose of art, aside from something making something aesthetically pleasing, which is important. Yes, everything looks ugly now. I understand that. But more fundamentally, it's to capture something that is human, something that a machine could never on its own capture. And machines, in that sense, are always just following us. They're never pioneering anything. It's not really in their, not DNA, but in their programming to truly innovate. So the idea of innovating for innovation's sake is very, very human. Something that if an alien looked at it, it would almost be incomprehensible, but it actually communicates something fundamentally human to the viewer. And so I think that's a problem we're getting into where aesthetically it's easier than ever to make things that are technically aesthetically pleasing, but it's not communicating any distinct human experience. And if that might be what you were getting at as well. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a shift gears to the UK as we call it here, but there's a similar thing here where if there's this meme goes around in Britain at the moment called the UK. If you've seen it, it's like
Yeah, yeah.
YOOKAY. And and people have been discussing it, and Crumbly Group, I think, sort of coined the term, and I've done a little bit of commentary on it. And I do find it interesting. And the when you look at it, the typical kind of the UK aesthetic will be, say, an old, like 500-year-old church, but there'll be like a woman in a burqa standing outside of it, and it'll have this kind of grey, sort of dilapidated look or it'll be an advertisement where it'll be a woman for the Welsh Nationalist Party, but it'll be like a kind of black woman from sort of as if she just come out from an Amazon advert or something like this. And so the UK aesthetic is this kind of deterritorializing of the British Isles, essentially. And it touches on what we were talking about with technology, because we are going through a moment here. Something is happening, which usually would have a voice. It would have a way to express itself, like most other eras that we've gone through did. But what you find is that it's like part of the UK aesthetic is that it cannot acknowledge that it is dystopian. And so this kind of so it's this kind of weird feedback loop where it is an aesthetic which sort of baked into it is the idea that it denies itself. And so if you, for example, see you may get this picture, for example, of a woman and she's on the London Underground, and then there'll be all of like the urban youth and London's diversity, but it'll be a woman and she's sitting there reading like a Jane Austen novel amongst all of this decay and squalor. But for the kind of the narrative that we have to abide by, there's nothing off there, because a shitlib would say, well, they're all just citizens. It's all I see is people. This hatchling thing, which I coined years ago, which people, people still
we used
all
it
the time.
recently, I think, on the show.
It's crazy how much that caught on over all the stuff that I've done. But yeah, so people will play a hatchling, and it'll be like, well, what is it like? If you've got this aesthetic where it's this grotty London Underground train, and it's a one white woman reading like a Jane Austen novel paperback, and then everywhere you look, it's just decay and diversity and people from like the third world biomass. We aren't allowed to actually be honest that there is something is in the process of being killed and born here. We just have to pretend that nothing's happened. We just have to pretend that this is all just natural. Of course we don't, but it's controversial to point it out. And so you end up in this kind of non-place where you're going through a particular time in a particular place, and it has a particular aesthetic to it, but we're not allowed to actually artistically or intellectually kind of tease it apart and get into what it is because of its nature. Where you can go back to the 1970s, or you can go back to the strikes or short work weeks, bin men strikes in the 70s. You can go into the kind of Thatcher era of Thatcher in a blue dress and people kind of closing down the mines, but also people beginning to make a lot of money as sort of neoliberalism and financial services came in, and all of this kind of thing. It's got its own look and it's got its own aesthetic. But where we are now with the UK, you can't actually be honest about it. So it's got this underground sort of interest, it's got this kind of subversive element to just kind of trying to tease out what it is, as it just gradually consumes the whole country, because part of it is that you'll have like a kind of Islamic community day out on top of the Pennines. So you've got this mixture of the most sort of spiritually English, Brythonic parts of the world mixed with the intruders, and you're not allowed to tease the two apart.
Yeah, I think London, and this might have been just made up number, of something like 80% non-native British. Does that number sound right? It's something crazy high.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. It's a bit confusing because they'll have in like white British, so it could be that somebody's came in from somewhere around Europe and got a passport or something. But yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
It's one of those facts that reveals how unequipped I am to discuss this matter with the average person. You mentioned the hatchling, and also I believe Millennial Woes just recently, he's had a tweet go viral which basically explains what you mean by hatchling, which is, he used the example of a leftist, but he said they just pretend not to know what anything is, thus rendering discourse impossible. So you can show what London has become, and you'll be talking to people and they'll say, well, what's wrong with that? Explain to me why that's wrong. And then I just gotta start blasting. I just gotta, you know what I mean? Like you're an enemy. Once they start pretending not to know what you mean, or asking, why is that bad? Why is anything bad? You were everyone's an immigrant, so what's wrong with this? Then I think people say the assassination of Charlie Kirk did this, but I think they've been trending that way for quite some time. Where, you know, as bombastic as it might sound, discourse is dead. But I mean it in the sense that you just can't talk to people. You can just broadcast your ideas, but I don't know who's interested in debating with a shitlib anymore on these issues. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to convince them. They have their tactics, they have their defenses up. They think they got you, but what their defenses are just, I refuse to accept your premise. And they say, okay, well, I guess we're not. I guess we're done talking. I guess, you know what I mean. Like, and that was the last thing we thought we could do with these people. But as I said before, I'm putting an article up on Vanguard's journal maybe today about how, people misunderstand the friend enemy distinction, I believe, and it has them shopping around for one way friendships. But really, you need to understand that there's many people, even of your kinfolk, that they're effectively your enemy, in the sense that not only do they not have any self-determination for their survival, they want to attack your will to self-determination. It's a downward spiral into civilizational suicide. And again, if you say it like that, people think you're blackpilling, but I think you need to be realistic about what's at stake. Like, certain things have never been worse. And we were talking about before this idea of it's very hard to mount a rebellion against modernity through aesthetics, because people will say, just make beauty, make beautiful things, and that will repel the forces of this fallen state. But I tend to think that it's more reflective of the society you have. Like, you need to have that vitality first to produce the art. Otherwise, you just produce beautiful propaganda, and beautiful propaganda can be fine on its own, but it really is utilitarian in that sense. But if you don't have a sense of beauty to express, you can't just make it. If everyone is just depressed and dying and they hate the world and they understand it's never been this bad, it is very difficult to make anything substantial, I think. Everyone says politics is downstream from culture. I tend not to think of it that linearly. I tend to think of it that, to produce beautiful culture, you need people to not want to fucking kill themselves. Otherwise, you get the media that we have now, which in so many words can be described as very nihilistic, especially in music, right? It's a very nihilistic time we're in. And the causes of that are so multitudinous. I don't know if there's one response to that. And perhaps that is blackpilling. But anyway, I'm in a very long-winded way saying I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, and I've tended to. The last week I've done an article about the sort of the discourse with the Fuentes Tucker sort of stuff. But by and large, and I did a video today as well. But by and large, I focus almost exclusively these days on Britain, because I feel like there's something visceral about it. There's something immediate about it. And I find, like, you get into this when you focus too much on America, and you get into this kind of big pomp, and it's all of this big show, because I'm not in America. And I'm sure that there's, like, if you're actually in America and you're kind of grinding it out on, like, the subway in Chicago or whatever, it will be similar sort of experience to the UK. It's just that I'm not there. And I think there is something to be said. Like, you do have to kind of stare these things in the face as they are, in its seediness and its grottiness. There's a kind of very hard realism to life in Britain, in England, in England, more than the rest of the United Kingdom, I would say, as well, though it's creeping in elsewhere. Like, life in England is hard, and there's a kind of grit and a grime and a squalor to it, which is really hard hitting these days. And it's fascinating. It fascinates me to sort of explore it, and all of it as well. Like, you've actually got the kind of the routine murders and stabbings and weird things that go on a weekly basis. There'll be like a rape from an asylum seeker almost every day now. and you get these whole storylines and sagas where, and there was one in Epping, the migrant hotel there, where like I mean it just it's all, before it happened. I have to be. I'm hoping that I get the details of this correct, but they were told that they were going to have to house. They were going to have like an asylum seeker hotel. I mean, even then, right from the beginning, how insane is it that just the very idea of asylums? These men rock up in boats and they're put in these hotels. And the locals, they said, we don't want them here. We don't feel safe. Our kids don't feel safe. It was right next to a school, and they were ignored. And then once the hotel filled up, there was an actual case of a girl being touched up by one of the men. She was 14, and she was sexually. I'm not sure how far, but it was pretty bad. And then it turned out, well, this is an optical problem for the regime. So there was a cover-up operation put into motion. And then the locals began protesting against it, like out on the streets, doing these rallies. And then the government bust in, sort of shit-lib activists that they've got on speed dial from NGOs to counter-protest. And then eventually the fella who did the sexual assault, he went to jail, and then they tried to transfer him or something, and they released him from jail. And then on top of that, they gave him £500, so he's wandering around.
I think I saw this. Is that the one where they're like he was released by mistake and there was just video of him wandering the streets?
Yeah, just wandering the streets. And then so the people of Epping launched this legal appeal and were successful against having this hotel there, against it housing immigrants. And then that was crushed by the main government itself. And they said, no, like their appeal was successful. It was going to be sort of withdrawn. And then London decided, actually, no, it stays. And you just think, this is a people who've done absolutely, before the problem came, they warned about it. Their worst fears of perhaps a stereotype were confirmed because the girl was touched up and abused. And then you can play in the kind of the anti-white, anti-native sentiment of the government itself, and all of the institutions revealed themselves without a care in the world. And then it even turns out the legal system is corrupted. And then it turns out the democratic system is corrupted. And there's just nothing you can do about it.
I hate to joke about this, but it's so ludicrous. It sounds like one of those schlocky action horror movies you'd see from the 80s, like a trauma film. 'Cause if you describe what it is, it's like the evil governor put a bunch of foreign retarded rapists next to the school. Like you would say that, oh, this is obviously heightened for cinema, but then that actually just happens. There's no way to describe the situation where it doesn't fill you with some level of murderous rage. And you talk about nudge units. You want to talk about the nudge effect. I saw this happen over the course of many years. Like how does a hotel like this get placed in that location in that small town? It's because they started by just putting them in blocks of hotel rooms in urban centers, saying it's going to be temporary. We're not housing them there forever. Then they let people tolerate that. Then they said, well, we're just going to keep them there indefinitely. Well, actually, we got to build some hotels for them. Actually, maybe we just have these houses no one's using. You know, no one's using these houses. We're just going to buy them up and put them there. Every step of the way, over the course of an entire generation, you know, the water is boiled with the frog in it, of course. And then occasionally, and I think the British people have shown some real grit and surprising aggressiveness in this recently, where they just kind of snap out of it, because in my experience the governments tend to do too much too fast. Like we said at the start, they start shoving this stuff through in an inelegant way, and so the insanity of the situation does dawn on people, especially where they're living. But at that point, you need some kind of radical action because they tried to do it the legal way. They voted against it, doesn't help. Campaigned against it, doesn't help. And even when they do succeed, they just shut it down anyway. So you're proving to these people that there's no legal recourse. And this isn't about a gay flag painted on a bridge. It's not over something that the left can make fun of you for caring about. It's like, no, these are rapists that don't speak our language that they put right next to my school. That's real. And you're going to get a real response from people. And, it sucks that it's got to be parents that do it. But yeah, sorry. Actually, before I go back, I wanted to call out some super chats we've gotten because I don't want people to think that they shouldn't give money, and they definitely should. We got Louis Shaw here saying AI is just a large language model, just copies what we type on the internet, vomits it back to you, more like a mirror based on the average internet user. This is from a while ago when we were talking about AI. Yes, I agree with that. That's why, let me just say, I always separate the larger concept of AI from LLMs. LLMs are kind of a subset of what they're trying to accomplish with AI, but that is true. We've got Quarty7. How does this help us in Canada? This is when we were discussing art, I believe. How does this help us in Canada? Should we start pumping out our counter slop or just use AI to clip farm and pump out documentaries? Only two options. Yeah, I think you can use AI to, like, if you have something that you actually want to accomplish, or making your own documentaries is actually good. Or here's an idea. If you want to get into AI slop and be good at it, start looking for content that you like. I'm not even saying Blood Satellite, but how many Substackers out there have really great written content that needs a visual representation? Think of your favorite creator that just mainly writes. I'm thinking of John Carter. I like John Carter. There's dozens you can think of and say, well, what if I take their writing, animate it in some way, add a narration or something, add some music, and then put that up on TikTok, see if it has legs. You can do a lot with AI slop to give a different form to something that you like. Experiment with that. If it fails, don't blame me. And that's not just for Canada. That's everywhere else. Did you have any... Does that sound like something good, Morgoth, or am I just out to fucking lunch?
I don't know. I don't know because it's kind of bypassing. It's kind of creating an incentive where people just won't read.
That is true. That is true.
But I mean, just before, one of the things that I thought was hilarious that I saw, which was AI last week or a few days ago, was when you had this the Sydney Sweeney interview, and everybody was doing their things on it. Everybody was getting their takes in, and I saw one video where like did you? I'm going to assume you saw the clip. You had this kind of horrible shit lib sort of American, what do they call it, that the valley girl accent where it goes up at the end of every sentence.
Yeah. This was a woman who was ugly her entire life and adopted the mannerisms of what she thinks hot girls do.
And one of the edits that I saw, it had her head, but I know it's cruel as well, and it had her head, but they made her head look like really huge and bulbous. And they did the bit. She did the bit like, would you like to explain yourself or whatever it was she said? I'd give you the opportunity to explain that. But then it cut to Sydney Sweeney, and you had like the lasers go in the eyes, and there was this kind of aura around her. And this kind of heavenly aura, and they had Sonna came in from Rammstein as if like there's this kind of deformed shit woman, and then you've got this kind of Aryan goddess holding the line with these, and it was all like, to a degree, it was like, I'm going to assume the AI was involved with that. I just thought it was hilarious. I just thought it was so funny.
I will say, as someone with darker hair myself, I got brown hair. That meme was highly destructive to the brunettes of the world.
Yeah. So it's one now and then. But mainly, I'm down on it. And somebody in the chat could say that you probably don't even need AI to do that thing.
Exactly. Hey, back in my day, we used to do that by hand. We had to forge our fucking memes. in Adobe Premiere. Here we go. Lewis Shaw with another 5, whatever that is, GBP. I don't fucking know. Who recalls the political polarization stuff from the 2010s? The end point of discussion, if it was to happen, it had to happen back in the 70s and 90s. I'm sorry, I'm not getting these when they're posted. It might sound utterly incoherent. I want to get back to, because I know we actually have to get going before long, but you were touching on what was supposed to be the topic of this before I led us astray. It was the grooming gangs all throughout the United Kingdom, maybe even broadly Europe. But you have done such important writing on this topic, and the most recent, if I can pull it up, it was what was it called? Like the nuclear. It's number 5. How multiculturalism consumes everything. Do you recall the name of a?
I think the one you look. I did an audio recently about the inquiry. The one I think you're looking for is that our multicultural
Yes,
reactor
Multicultural
5.
Reactor 5, because that was one I was looking at. We're looking at, oh, this is the audio for people. Grooming Gang Inquiry, the fix is in. I highly recommend looking into this. And
It's easy found on the search the search bar of Substack where it's great. So our multicultural reactor 5 is what that one was called. And basically, I mean, this is separate from what I was talking about before, which is the sort of the random kind of rapes which the asylum seekers are doing. The grooming gangs is slightly different because then you've got these mainly Pakistanis. You know, one of the things that when you talk about these things, you've got to bear in mind that you're being watched, and you know you can't make blanket statements about a group. So you'll say mainly Pakistanis and all of it, and all of this kind of language and all of this kind of coping is kind of what led us to the grooming gangs situation in the first place. It's and the reason why I called it our. I mean, I've wrote so much about this and spoken about this over the years, and it's because, as the title suggests, I think in a way this is the equivalent to the Chernobyl disaster in the Soviet Union, where what you get is a kind of the failure of a regime and a system and another managerial system at that, which is built on lies and built on corruption and built on hiding obvious truths. And what happens is that because of that, it hemorrhages legitimacy over time, which is the gist of the article that are on that one, which a lot of people, you know, it got a lot of traction, it hit with a lot of people. And I get into sort of the similarities because Chernobyl is something that I find interesting just in and of itself, because it's the failures of a managerial state and how it copes and how it deals with a disaster which runs against its own political formula, which is exactly what the grooming gangs issue is. And you can say, like, to be honest, one of the things that I always say, though, is that the Soviet Union did not actually want the Chernobyl disaster to happen. And when they did lie about it, they did cover it up. And it was because of the failures baked into the system of itself why it happened. And it's the same with the grooming gangs issues. And then you kind of begin to tease in and dig away at how this happens. So you have to ask questions like, was it that all of the people in the councils, the police, the child protection services, were they all like far left? And the answer is actually no. But then you think, well, okay, so why did they not say anything? What happened here? And then you begin to look at the incentive structures baked in to the managerial classes who had to deal with all of this. And it becomes this kind of it becomes something where you see that the whole system is just riddled with this is just cancer. It's like a cancer and a rot from the very top to the very bottom, and that's what's revealed in this. Again, like in a similar way is what you could say that Chernobyl was to the Soviet Union. Obviously, people will point to different reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed. I'm not really saying that's why the Soviet Union collapsed. What I'm saying is that because of perverse incentives baked into these systems, bureaucracies, you often get absolutely horrifying outcomes, which we're not
Yeah,
supposed
and
to.
someone made a good point in here. It's a line that I always say: "A system is what it does." I was using that as recently as today. Chernobyl's a great example because, and this is something we have said before, that these historic moments, they tried to dismiss them as one-offs. Jeffrey Epstein would be another great example where the system will say this was the one bad guy and we got him. In fact, the system is operating perfectly because we got them, right? But anyone who pays attention says, but what does this reveal? Why was something like that allowed to happen? What are the reciprocating effects? What is this entire system behind him? And you got him, but why won't there be another Jeffrey Epstein? Obviously, there is. He's not just one historical aberration within the largest empire the world has ever known. Similarly, with I hate even to use the word grooming gang. I don't like accepting their framing. I like to call it Muslim rape gangs. You're not allowed to say that on YouTube, but I get away with it all the time, so I don't know. But saying that, like, yes, they want you to think that, yep, there was just one and it was like this strange thing that happened, and yes, we lied about it, but we got it. And what we should be asking is, no, how big is this? And every single fucking day you get more evidence that this is such a widespread thing, and so many institutions and so many players are culpable in this.
Yeah. And even the term grooming gang is itself interesting, because when news began to trickle out, mainly because of the BNP, not Tommy Robinson, but mainly because of the BNP and Mark Collett, Nick Griffin, in the early 2000s, this began to poke out. And in where it was happening, people in Britain may remember, there was actually riots. There was what the media were calling far-right riots going on. So there's the fella here says the name grooming gangs is interesting because it's meant to soften. It is meant to soften the truth of what was going on, because when news began to slip out, the regime didn't really have appropriate language to describe what it was. They could have called it just sort of sexual abuse gangs or rape gangs, or which is a kind of weird because a lot of the girls are actually going along with them, if you know what I mean. And so there was this phenomena that was happening, and they didn't have the language to deal with it, and they knew it was bad news. And so they opted to have it as a politically correct term, which was soft, called grooming gangs, which everybody hates. Everybody thinks it's a cop-out, and correctly so. Now, what happened over the years is that people began to understand that the term grooming gang, that just came to that was just a Pakistani rape gang. That's what that meant. And as the horrors of what was going on slipped out more and more, remember, it was covered up, people just began to associate grooming gang with something truly, truly appalling, on a massive scale. And so this led to a problem, because the original term, which was there meant to be a politically correct term to soften what was actually going on, went full circle to where people just associated that with something, these inter-ethnic rape gangs that were being covered up. So it went all the way back around to being a toxic term again. And what the regime began doing is to lump in white pedophiles with the term grooming gang to once again change the
I've
definition
seen that,
of it.
yeah.
And this is what the audio that I did a week or two back with Jess Phillips. This is what they're trying to do. So there was a huge outcry at the beginning of the year about this when Elon Musk was hammering it. they got pressure into doing an inquiry, and then the inquiry itself became this sort of, well, we're going to bring in more people onto the panel, and it'll be women who are young women and girls who have faced abuse. They've been molested. But but it'll be maybe their uncle or their cousin. Now here's where you get to the sort of the shit lib kind of attitude to this, which makes it all worse. And it's because what they're going to then do is say, well, a crime is a crime, a rape is a rape, and you, being this kind of far right racist, you only care about this because you can blame Pakistanis or Bangladeshis or the immigrant communities, these Islamic communities. That's all you really care about. You don't care about the girls. This is the kind of shit that we have.
And I'll go one further. What they'll say is, and if you really cared about them, you would pay for free abortions. Like, this is what they say on fucking X all day, which is like you don't even care about these women. If you did, you'd give them $1 million, and because you're not giving them $1 million, you don't care about them being raped. I'm like, okay, counterpoint, die. Counterpoint, fucking die. You know what I mean? Like, it's so like it's just like the thing that you're seeing a lot of Indians do now on X, and that's relevant to where I am in Canada, where we talk about these rape games, we talk about these gangs, and then they've got, because the word went out in all their group chats saying like, oh, here's some instances of white people doing it, so hit them with that. So it's like, oh, well, yeah, you think Indian people eat poop? Well, here's an article I found from 1978 about a woman that ate her own poop, and guess what? She's right. And I go, okay. You know what? Fuck you. Like, I'm done with because they're saying it's like, oh, you care about this? Well, now you can't care about it at all.
Yeah, and it's, well, so when they do that, they're deliberately trying to muddy the waters. But here's the thing: the British sort of managerial state is built on racism. It's baked into law. There is a huge amount of laws in this country which state specifically that crimes involving race are more serious. So that when it's one race attacking another because of its race, you'll go to jail for much harder. It'll be treated much more seriously. And but they see all of this was built on the assumption that it would be whites attacking non-whites. And in one case in particular, which is the Stephen Lawrence case, which is why the police ended up being broken by this, was that a couple of white lads stabbed a young black lad to death at a bus shelter way back in the early 90s. And then they decided the police was institutionally racist, and then all that stuff comes in. So on the one hand, it's like all of these racial crimes are much, much more serious. But then when whites are actually the victim, they tell you that a crime is just a crime, and you only care about race because they're white. So it's just
and it does affect the judges.
It's just absolutely infuriating.
It affects the judges. For people who think this is just online discourse we're talking about, this sort of mentality impacts the judges and informs judges' decisions. And in Canada, where we're at, a lot of really the decision making is left to individual judges. American law is very, very different. And so in most cases, judges can unilaterally just decide that someone deserves more time because they perceive racial animus in it. So it's an easy way to 2x or 3x your sentencing. If whatever the judge was reading that morning on the state-run media, or their niece was talking about, maybe it's starting to turn the other way, but I don't think so. So really, when you enter into a court here in Canada, you're battling the zeitgeist and wherever it's at, whether or not maybe you look like someone who would do that. Maybe you remind someone of the way someone looks in some article they read once about a skinhead or something. They're like, okay, and maybe you're just bald. Maybe you're not a skinhead. Maybe you shave your head because you don't have any fucking hair. Too bad. Now you get 3 times the sentencing because you represent something sort of abstract to that individual who is constipated and they're in a bad mood. You're taking your life in your own hands.
And it's, I mean, I've read the court records. This way back, it was of. There's been many cases have come out since, but it's one of the reasons why I ended up radicalized, if you want to call it that. But it's clear in the court records that there's a racial component. The girls are being targeted because they're white, and while it's happening, they're getting racial abuse. And but then it's like all of a sudden, well, they become these kind of classic liberal sort of, you know, Jordan Peterson's, where we're all just individuals again. So having actually built up this massive amount of regulatory bloat and this entire sort of colossus of legal jargon based on race, when whites are the victim, it's just not there. We all just magically transform back into race blind classic liberals, where a crime is just
Also,
a
when
crime.
it comes to white girls getting raped, all of a sudden they pretend to understand what per capita is. All of a sudden they say, well, I mean, they're just in a white area. There's more white girls. Why wouldn't they do that? You know, and then you realize, oh, you're actually defending this. And if they always cross that Rubicon, they always end up having to defend, and they do this by condemning white girls. You see, it makes you fucking sick. I'm sure you've seen it, where it's like, well, you know what? In their culture, they're not as slutty. In their culture, maybe these girls are asking for it. Like they're doing the they were asking for it thing. Why is it that we're the only ones saying that these women aren't asking for it? You see what I'm saying? Like, and that's why when you deal with these people, like, you don't have values, you don't have principles, you just have the script. You have the script that was updated, and you have the consensus now. You have like what pickup artists would do. It's like, oh, you have the new icebreaker line, deploy, get this to trip them up. But I'm like, you've gotten to the point where you are in so many ways saying these girls deserve what, and it's, again, you can't talk about this without getting utterly furious.
Yeah, and so the idea of it being an in-group and out-group issue, which is what I argue, because it is. But this gets back to the article about Chernobyl, is that what you actually get to is the lie at the heart of multiculturalism itself, where we're not just all these kind of individualistic consumers who just work and contribute towards the GDP. What this reveals is that, like, this kind of tribal hatreds, genocidal in nature, have been imported into the country. And if the government acknowledges that, then the next step on from that is that people are going to have demand policies to change it. So in the last inquiry that came out, the results of it were I think it was the Casey report, and she actually said there is a ethnic sort of ethnic on ethnic issue here. The girls are targeted because they're white, and the government covers it up because they're white, and this has to be taken into account. So then it becomes this kind of, I just saw the word like hot potato in the article as you were scrolling it, where how the government's like, well, okay, so we can't actually sort of admit to the lie. We can't actually admit that all of the kind of the entire worldview in the country that we've made is a lie. It's built on nonsense. In the same way that they say in Chernobyl, the incentive structure was to get cheap boron rods, because that was the way it was all skewered. Another element to this, which goes into the bureaucracy itself, is that there's a fascinating Adam Curtis documentary, one of the older ones, called The Trap. And it focuses on Tony Blair, New Labour, quite heavily. And it's all about these. So it's basically the game theory of that mathematician. What was he called again? He was kind of weird and autistic. But the thief's dilemma or something, is it? The jewel thief's dilemma. Basically, the idea is that you can't trust anybody, and you only have to think for yourself. Now, the Tony Blair sort of regime baked this into the bureaucracy, into the system itself, and it became all about these outcomes and giving people bonuses and basically, if you toe the line and you get these quotas met, you will be rewarded on the individual level. And what you're seeing on the screen there is an example of the perverse outcomes, because what they did, I know this sounds all very boring and banal, but what actually happened as one example of this is that the NHS they had to abide by these quotas. So if the NHS was running out of beds or bed space, they had a problem. So one of the things they did in order to meet their quotas in the hospitals was to saw the little wheels off the bottom of the trolleys that people were being brought in on, and then reclassify them as beds. And another thing they did was that you had all of these people piling up in the corridors waiting to go in. And so they just pulled a curtain across the corridor and then renamed the corridor a ward. So on paper, it looked like this is doing gangbusters. This is just amazing. The NHS has never been better. But the actual lived reality was a total horror show. And when you go into the local councils and the local sort of bureaucracies or the child protection services, they got that as well. But what it meant was that you couldn't actually have an overarching morality, because everybody's just an individual thinking only about their own career and their Christmas bonus and a raise and getting ahead in the system without thinking. So everybody becomes a kind of reptile. And when you've got a problem which is systemic, this becomes a nightmare to deal with. So if you then have a girl walks in and she's got blood on her jeans and she's been beaten up, and she says, there's 5 Pakistanis around the corner in a car waiting for me, I need help. And then they were repeatedly turned away from police or child protection services and ended up straight back in those cars. How does that happen? Well, how that happens is that the incentives of the system were that if I report this, I'm going to get passed over for promotion. If I report this, I'm going to end up in trouble. What if she's wrong? What if I come across like a racist? And so all of a sudden you see that the entire system is riddled with perverse incentives.
Also, we have a comment here from Patfa saying, look up Home Office counting rules as opposed to crimes. That's how crime is hidden, as some crimes are not counted properly. I believe that to be the case. Aside from the hospital example you gave, you see this everywhere where they're trying to hide the actual data and numbers. Just today, or maybe a few days ago, Carney, our prime minister, he announced that there was 65,000 jobs added to Canada. So yay, jobs. But if you look at it, it's just part-time jobs. And actually, if you look at full-time jobs, they've decreased significantly. But it's like one of these little sleights of hand that they do, which to me comes across as malicious. And that's why I wanted to ask you this earlier, but I completely forgot. Maybe now's the time because we have to get going soon. But one thing I noticed, I'm sure you've seen the same videos about British police officers, because it seems that the police in the UK more than anywhere else seem to hold actual contempt for the people that they're visiting. Like I've seen videos in America, Canada, Australia, where the cops are told to go and get someone because of a post or something. And sometimes they seem almost apologetic. But when I see videos of British police officers, whatever ridiculous, whatever law they're enforcing, because it's always, I've got your social media posts here, and it's just frivolous nonsense. But they seem to take it very, very seriously. It seems that this grooming inquiry, we might call it, has been going on for so long, but I haven't heard any leaks from the police. I haven't seen a single police officer admit that anything went wrong. There, of course, there's the blue wall of silence, but I guess the question is, does it seem like the case to you that the British police seem to have particular contempt towards the public?
Yeah, they do. And basically, they've just had their brains fried with regime propaganda since what I was talking about earlier. With the Stephen Lawrence case, there was a huge investigation into that That was called the McPherson Report. That was when the police was sort of classed as institutionally racist, and they basically purged the entire police. They just relentlessly came down on the police. But in more recent years, something even more sort of insidious is happening where the actual kind of good policemen are leaving the force in droves by the thousands. Now, that's actually a bit weird because I think they sign up for a few years at a time. So you tend to get like every so often there'll be like 10,000 leave in a year or something. And what they're doing is filling up those placements with feminists and girl bosses and bugmen. They're lowering the bar, and the people who are they're bringing in are they're basically they're regime friendlies. They're being vetted on that basis. This is how you end up with kind of scrawny little 20-year-old girls who are 5'2" and but with like a head full of self-righteous dogma. But the man who was 45 years old and still fit, but with a lot of experience and sort of empathy, he's there on the outs. Not just because they're being pushed and passed over, which they are, but because they're just getting out because it's a thoroughly miserable existence.
Yeah, that's why I don't know if there's, someone made a comment earlier in the chat that says the police investigated themselves and found that the police did nothing wrong. So I think we need to end it right around there. But I wanted to see if you had any closing thoughts. I know this is such a big topic, and you've been covering it for as long as anyone I've known. I know Patriotic Alternative have probably been on this tip for quite some time, and others, but I think of you when I think of someone who's been staying on this topic for so long. Is there any cause for optimism? Have you seen things get better, worse, stay the same? Is there any light at the end of this tunnel, as far as you can see?
Um, one of the things are changing very fast in Britain because what's happened is, I mean, I've wrote about this as well, but what's happened is that the multicultural sort of third world biomass and its barbarism is becoming too much for the regime to handle. There's a certain amount of buy-in that any political system has to have a certain amount of buy-in from most of the people most of the time, and ours doesn't. And this is where you get into some dangerous territory. This is where you get into the disconnect, and the state of the country is just shocking. So we'll see that there's a little bit of hope there. I'm not known for my optimism, but I'm not just pessimistic because that's my brand. I'm not just like sort of shilling despair. I just try and be realistic about it, and to be honest as I can. But what I do see, just the sheer sort of scale of the anger in the country, um, there's a little bit there. There's a little flicker of light there.
And that is a good place to end. I wanted to show people, you need to check out his YouTube page, Morgoth's Review. Neglected to mention this at the start, but you host a show with a good friend of mine by the name of Endeavor, classic movies. That's the one. Hey, that's one type of thing we produce in this side that'll never get old. I even do my own fucking review show. So check that out on YouTube, and also be sure, if you haven't already, you must check out his Substack, Morgoth's Review. You can find, as I've shown on this stream, the couple articles to look at, but there's all kinds of great stuff on here. Go listen to the Grooming Inquiry, the Fixes In, to learn more about this highly depressing topic. But
I mean, I do. Just my final word. I do. I try not to paywall because I want people to sort of read the stuff and that. But every month, I do a podcast where I read through all of the articles of the month and give a few takes here and there for like paid subscribers. So I try to keep everybody sort of happy, and that's a more intimate little thing that I do at the end of each month. So if you don't have time to read a lot of articles, like I read through them all at the end of the month.
that's a great thing. That I'm sure makes a lot of people happy. I do something similar that upsets people. So I do this paywall show called Real Secret Coffee Hours, where I try and focus stuff I don't want to do on Blood Satellite because we don't like to get into a lot of drama on there. So I said I'm going to make a show that just covers right wing drama, and it covers like debates people have, and when people write Substacks against each other. We just review those, and there's not as much as you might think, because sometimes I'm just searching. I'm like, who's feuding this week, and it's nothing. No one's really feuding, or it's
Well, I wouldn't know about anything like that. But I'm going to get going then. So
Thank
thanks a
you
lot.
again for taking the time. This has been wonderful. Thank you everyone for showing up, and I'll see you all next time.